Hi, I'm Josh McGrath,
I'm Andrew Haas.
and this is the Ardent Pursuit Podcast. Today, we're going to explore the second area of vision casting for 2025, and this is the area of relationship. It is so important for men to be actively engaged in building relationships with other men. And today we're going to talk about the importance of men having a brotherhood. So, Andrew, let's dive in. The term brotherhood is obviously not a term that we use often.
Yeah, you could say it's like somewhat outdated, but it's still used in some circles.
Yes, I've heard some podcasts talk about the importance of men having a brotherhood. And really what we're going to be unpacking today is the importance of men having other men in their life. Men that they can share burdens with, men that they can go through good times and difficult times with. Now, we want to provide a definition for our listeners, and we're not going to provide a comprehensive one. We're going to provide a definition that is simple,
Right.
and a place to start from.
Yep.
And we're going to define it this way: a brother who is born to help in a time of need. This is built upon the concept found in Proverbs 17:17. And the idea, the fundamental idea of a brotherhood is that there are men in your life who, in a moment of need, you can call on and they are there. They know you well enough. They're invested enough in your life. You're invested enough in their life where they are there to help you in a time of great need.
Yeah, and to date, we've generally talked about relationships and men as it pertains to women.
Yep.
That's more or less what we're about here.
Yeah.
But here, we're more going to talk about men being in real, authentic relationship with other men and why that's important and what that looks like.
And as men, I think our natural tendency often is to believe that, I can do this. I'm self-sufficient, a bit of a Lone Ranger, mentality. And while that might be true, in some seasons of life or at certain points, the reality is we are created to be in relationship, not only with God and not only, through marriage, but also with other men. And in today's modern context, many men are uncomfortable talking about being, in relationship, and obviously we're talking about, friendship here is what we're talking about. But they're uncomfortable with the idea of being in relationship with other men knowing them, with other men, seeing their vulnerabilities, with other men knowing their weaknesses.
And there's probably several reasons for that, which we can get into. But I just wanted to circle back to why it's important for men to be in a relationship with other men. There's this constant tension that men generally live with. And it's one of, on one hand, men are to be competent and capable and in some ways self-sufficient.
Yep.
We can do it. I got this. Those are good attributes. At the extreme, though, men often take those attributes to an extreme where I don't need anybody. I got it myself. I don't need to rely on anyone. And that's where men need to be careful because, yes, we're to be competent, capable, confident,
Yep.
but also we need to have this ability to engage with other men and rely on other men to challenge us, to encourage us,
Yep.
hold us accountable.
For sure.
There's this needed part of men relating to other men in a close way that's ultimately going to make us better.
And we like to see that and watch that, on TV and witness that in other areas of life, but we oftentimes don't want to invite that as part of our own lives. I think about, movies like Lord of the Rings, TV shows like Band of Brothers, movies like Saving Private Ryan. There's something about the nature of a brotherhood in those movies going through difficulty and challenges together, pursuing a vision and an end goal together, relying on one another, that really just inspires kind of the masculine drive to say, I love that. Like, I want something like that. But then when it comes time to cultivate that in our own lives, we oftentimes will shy away from that. We'll hold that at arm's width and say, no, I actually don't want you to be part of my life in that way.
Yeah, there's a reason why those storylines ring true and resonate so deeply with us.
Yeah, I think about the scene in, Lord of the Rings, the end of the first movie, where, Boromir, he's dying, and Aragorn runs to him. And there's like this really like tender, raw moment where Boromir is essentially confessing to him and you know, crying at the same time about his failure. And basically asking Aragorn to be a better man than he was. And you watch that, and there's something so inspiring about that. But then as men, it's like, oh, well, I can't tell another guy what's going on in my life. And
Right.
God forbid I ever cry in front of another man. I would just never do that. And this is not about being emotional. It's not. It's about being vulnerable and being open and honest with other men who know you, who love you, who have your back, or in the military, have your six.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. How men feel and express emotion are going to be very different than how women express and feel them. And that's by design. And what men need to understand is feeling and expressing emotion is not a problem. It's a good thing. How you do it and when you do it, that's what you got to figure out.
I think about, you know, in my own life, over the years, I've had some not great cars. My first car, the Rusty Musty, I think it was a 92 Oldsmobile wagon. Yeah, with the rear facing seats in the trunk. So it legally sat 8, more than a minivan because the front row was a bench. So you could sit 3, then 3, and then 2. And so I shared that with a good friend of mine, Jamie, and then graduated from there to, I think it was a 2001 Buick Century.
Okay.
And then graduated from there to a Dodge Intrepid, and then from there to a 2004 Honda Accord. So with all of those cars, there were different issues and different moments where they broke down. And probably one of my favorite stories is the Dodge Intrepid. It was, I don't know, 10, 11 o'clock at night. And I was driving home and it just like stopped working literally on the road. And I was like,
was this before cell phones?
No, thankfully cell phones were around. But I was like, really? Like, I can't believe this happened. And in that moment, I knew exactly who I was going to call. There are 2 brothers in my life who I'm close with, and John and Ben, and I called them up, and they came out at like 11 o'clock at night. John came out with his truck and his trailer. You know, we loaded my car up onto it. There's actually a picture that I took with my crappy cell phone at the time. You know, the cop is sitting there with the lights on as we're like loading my car onto the trailer. And while seemingly maybe an insignificant story, the significance of that story for me is the fact that I knew there were men in my life who I could call for help, and I didn't hesitate to call them because I knew they'd come and help, even though it was an inconvenient time, even though it was an inconvenient trip for them to have to drive out to me, load up my car. I think one of them had to give me a ride home. But like, because of the relationship that I'd had with them, the longevity of friendship, the way we'd invested in one another's lives, it wasn't a burden for me to call them. And in the same way, it wasn't a burden for them to show up and help, because a brother's born to help in a time of need. That's part of a brotherhood, is you recognize that there are gonna be moments that I'm called upon to come to your aid. You know, I'm gonna go back to the Lord of the Rings reference, you know, Gondor calls for aid, and you're ready to step up and to deliver regardless of the cost.
And it's through more, you could call them intense situations like this, that men build trust, grow friendships, grow relationships. And you know, one of the challenges we face in our modern life, you know, we have a lot of comforts. You could say life is less challenging in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And so men generally will feel more uncomfortable being expressive and engaging more closely with other men.
Yep.
Because there's this dynamic where men feel permission almost to relate to other men more intensely if the situation matches. For example, you can think of sports.
Yep.
You know, you think when points are scored, there's a moment of celebration and intensity where the guys are all in each other's business and they're just like celebrating and they're hugging and they're like rubbing their heads together and they're chest bumping. And it's like, you look at that and you're like, yeah, that's totally appropriate. Of course, if you saw guys just doing that on any given day, you'd be like,
A little weird.
that's a little weird.
Yeah.
And so I think there's an important component for men to have specific times or periods or moments in life that are intense, that are more challenging, because that's really where men grow closer to each other.
And relationships between men are oftentimes formed through doing things together, whether that's an activity or through just living life together. I mean, you and I have been friends for almost 20 years now.
Long time.
A long time. And there are many key moments that you and I can point to in our friendship that were, whether it was a difficulty, whether it was, an exciting, accomplishment, whether it was just living life and just having to navigate, the messiness of life. There are many moments that now, nearly 20 years later, there's a relationship and a friendship there that's forged through consistency, through accountability, through walking life together in the fun seasons and in some very difficult, very hard seasons where we were asking some tough questions. And I'm thankful for that because our friendship isn't built upon a one and done. We climbed Mount Everest together and that was a really hard moment. It's because we've lived life together. And one of our calls and challenges to men is to live life with other men over the long haul.
Mm-hmm. And, guys might be saying, okay, so I got to go out and force this thing to happen. I got to go make this happen. I got to find guys to be close with. What's the big deal? And you can actually look throughout history. And this is not a new thing.
Yeah.
In fact, you might even say it's tapered off in more modern times. But throughout history, brotherhoods were pretty common. Just for example, there were military brotherhoods. There were David's Mighty Men.
Yep.
The Knights Templar. Modern military brotherhoods like Navy SEALs, Green Beret. Religious brotherhoods like the Jesuits, Freemasons. Intellectual brotherhoods. We have Benjamin Franklin's Junto, his Society of 12 Men. Phi Beta Kappa.
A popular, brotherhood that is now thought of mostly as a party fraternity. But at one point actually did start as a fraternity of brothers that was an intellectual fraternity.
Yeah. And I think, and you could say, these are just lists of guys getting together, but there's really something deeper, is that throughout history, there was an understanding that men intentionally being together under, a common theme or for a purpose was really important.
And we see this even lived out in the life of Jesus. He brings together his tribe, his brotherhood of 12 men, where he shares life with them, and they are on a mission together, and they share each other's burdens in love with one another. And this idea of men living life with other men, like you said, is not a new thing. And in fact, if anything, it's something that we've parted from culturally, whereas historically, think about back in the day, there were so many quote unquote men only places, places where men would gather together. It was only for men, and it was a place for the brotherhood of men to exist. Now, doesn't mean that all those environments were healthy or holy, but there was kind of a recognition culturally across the globe that it was important for men to engage with other men on a regular basis. And that contributed to the flourishing and thriving of men all over the place.
And I think it's really important for men to understand that something I think we've lost, at least intellectually, is that men generally connect more deeply around challenge or conflict. It's not the only way, but it's an easy way.
Yeah.
And that's a good thing. And so it's one of the many reasons why men should lean into hard times, lean into challenging situations, lean into conflict for the purpose of resolving them. And in that process, you'll rely on other men, you'll grow closer to them. And that's really what this is about.
A recent study actually conducted by a psychologist at the Oxford University in England discovered that there are measurable health benefits for men who have 2 guy nights, per week. This study was conducted by Robin Dunbar, and he discovered 4 things. 1, men should meet up with other men twice a week to reap the full benefits of male friendship. 2, these gatherings should involve doing stuff together, such as team sports, male banter, or simply having a drink with friends, shoulder to shoulder versus face to face. Number 3, regular social interactions with male friends contribute to stronger immune systems, release of endorphins, decreased anxiety levels, faster recovery from illness, reduced risk of depression related to financial and job insecurities. And finally, number 4, the study recommends men physically meet with 4 friends 2 times a week. So what this study shows, and it's kind of funny that a study had to be conducted to discover this.
Right, to state the obvious.
Yes, men need other men.
Right.
At the end of the day, that's what this study reveals. Men need other men in their lives on a regular basis.
And it's not uncommon to get pushback on guy-only hangouts, and for possibly some valid reasons, but there's a lot of benefit. And what men need to realize is that when guys are in a guy-only environment, there's a real opportunity for men to challenge other men, to encourage them, to call them higher, that really don't happen in other environments. The thing is, men have to be intentional about making that happen, because it doesn't just happen on its own.
Yeah.
Guys have to be intentional when they're in those environments to pursue that, but those are the environments where it actually happens and there's a lot of good fruit.
Yes, and that's such a good reminder for why men need to prioritize relationships with other men. Now, it doesn't mean that all guy time is constructive, is healthy, is holy. There have been plenty of male-only gatherings where the stupidity of men comes out, where maybe being dumb and reckless happen, where sometimes men will be more crass or vulgar in male-only environments. So it doesn't guarantee that the best characteristics of men being challenged and being called higher are always going to happen.
Right.
That said, it is in those environments where that can happen, where that is most likely going to happen, where men are most likely going to respond well, is when they are in male-only environments. And it's really good because a lot of women don't necessarily find some of either the male humor, the male perspective, the male actions that, attractive or civilized. And so it's good for men to be able to be with other men in an environment where they have that outlet, to be able to connect with other guys who have a similar kind of perspective, thought process, or humor. Again, it needs to be sanctified. It needs to be holy.
Yes.
That's not an excuse to be crass and sinful 24/7. But it is really helpful for men to have that, because without that, what you end up is a very feminized male culture, because the only environments that men are in are either in a co-ed environment or with women only. And that's not healthy for the man, and that's not healthy for relationships, for marriage, or for culture as a whole.
And often when men are challenging other men, when we are calling each other higher in those environments, that process often could be unattractive or unappealing to women.
Oh, sure.
So they actually wouldn't want to be a part of that process.
Yeah.
Often aren't really helpful to be a part of the process. And even as observers, they might find it uninteresting, or worse, just unattractive. So as a guy, as you purpose to grow and mature and be more attractive, be more interesting, you actually want to find these environments that are guys only, where other men can make you a better man in the absence of women. Because that ultimately is going to make you more interesting to women.
Yes, your growth as a man should not be dependent upon wanting to grow for a woman.
No, that can't be the motivating factor.
It cannot be. Now, obviously, she's going to play a role in your growth, and particularly in marriage. Again, you can speak to this. The sanctification element of a man is going to happen exponentially more inside of a marriage because of a wife, but it can't be the only reason why he's becoming a better man.
No, you got to do it for yourself. That said, if you want to find a quality woman someday, if a guy's looking to get married, wants a quality woman, you've got to be a quality guy.
Yep.
You've got to be interesting. You've got to be well-spoken, all the things.
Sure.
So there's a way to orient yourself toward growth that you want to see that would make you more interesting to a quality woman. But again, if that's the only reason you're doing it, it's not going to last.
And so this idea of, you mentioned, you've got to be willing to grow for you. We're going to look at this briefly from a biblical perspective, in the sense that as believers, we are called to be holy as Christ is holy. We are called to be sanctified, to becoming more like him, which means that as men, we need to be becoming more and more like Jesus day by day. From a cultural worldview of just saying, hey, I want to be a better man for the woman that I'm pursuing, for the marriage I'm in, for the family I have, for the community that I live in, that's really important as well. And in both cases, one of the ways that we're going to recommend you do that is by finding mentors, by finding authority and accountability that you can have in your life who can speak into your life to challenge you as a man, to call you higher as a man, to see flaws in you and not just let them go, but actually say to you, hey, bro, you're doing this, you're saying this, you're behaving this way, and that's not becoming of a man. That's not becoming of a believer. This needs to change. And I want to help you grow in that way.
Mm-hmm. And again, that's the tension that men live with, being independent, being competent, also being submitted to guys. Who can speak into my life? Who can call me out? Who can call me higher?
Mm-hmm.
There's that tension. Yes, you want to go out, you want to lead, you want to be competent. Those are all great things. Can't take it too far.
Yeah.
Can't be out on your own, isolated, doing your own thing.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to have men who you are submitted to and who can speak into your life.
And so many men, myself included, I fall into this trap, just believe we know the answers.
Mm-hmm.
We know how to navigate the unknowns of life, even though it's our first time doing it, because, well, I'm a man.
Right.
Or I've read enough or I know enough to be dangerous.
Right. Which, to be clear, men should have answers.
Yes.
We should purpose to know things,
Yep.
to be wise, to be knowledgeable.
Mm-hmm.
We just can't, again, take that too far and think we know everything.
Exactly. Yeah, this is not farming out the responsibility of decision-making to other men.
Right.
We have a role to play, but recognizing that part of our ability to make a decision, to be wise, is to include other men into our decision-making process. And the way we do that is by having mentors, accountability, and authority who we've invited willingly into our life and not isolating ourselves from those who would challenge us. Because how often is it that when men start to be challenged, particularly in the Christian context, but by pastors, by elders, by ministry leaders, by friends, by mentors, by family, that they just isolate, they withdraw, they push away
Mm-hmm.
the very people who love them enough to speak into their life and to say, this isn't good for you. And that we see that time and time again. And so men have to move beyond the selfish inclination to say, I know it all and I don't need anyone's help, to lean into the correction and recognize that people are speaking into my life because they care about me, because they know more than me, because they've experienced things that I haven't experienced yet. And I want to grow and learn from those who've gone before me.
And I really can't stress the importance enough of men having peer relationships and mentor relationships. Guys need to be close with other men who are, you would call them peers.
Sure.
And men need to lean into older men who are, the next stage in life, who are ahead of them in life. That's where you gain the wisdom, the life experience. That's where you learn a lot. And then again, as we're talking about the brotherhood, there are also your peers that you're going to be close with. Those are the men that you're more living day-to-day life with.
Yeah.
They see the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you don't have a brotherhood, you need to get involved in one. And part of getting involved in one may actually require you to be a builder of a brotherhood in your life. Brotherhoods aren't something that you just stumble into, at least in the vast majority of cases. Generally, there's an intentionality to it. Going back to the earlier military examples, like the Navy SEALs, there's an intentionality where someone's applying to be a Navy SEAL. It didn't just passively happen. They didn't just stumble into that. And so there's 4 things that we want to briefly explore when it comes to being part of a brotherhood or establishing a brotherhood here. So there's 4 ways to do this. So number 1, join a group or a team. It's really important for guys to do stuff together. We've talked about that briefly already. And so whether you're joining a sports team, a community league, even something like a board game group can be so good for men because what it does is it gives you an activity, something to do. We've talked about before running together. We've been part of running groups where we run with other guys. And what it does is it gives you that activity where you're doing something together with a goal. And that's so good for men. That's one way that you just build a bond between brothers.
Yes, as they say, shoulder to shoulder, not face to face.
Exactly.
Now we can certainly sit here over a cup of coffee.
And we do.
We do. But more often than not, men are going to grow closer when they're doing something together.
Yes.
And the second point is prioritizing time. It is really important for men to either have a default schedule where they meet up with other men or be persistent with doing that on a recurring basis.
And as men, we don't tend to do that. We tend to kind of just let our schedules happen organically. And if that's the case, you won't end up being with other men. And I like to use the ABCD rule. always be confirming dates.
Yes.
So I'm always confirming dates in my life, whether that's to go to a family's house to cook with them, whether that's to meet up with a man in a mentorship position, whether that's to be mentored and to go to my authority and accountability. I'm always trying to confirm dates with people. And other men need to do that. Now, point number 3 here, shared discipline. Engaging in challenging activities that require accountability, such as daily exercise, learning a new skill, or spiritual discipline, is so good for men. I've been part of reading groups before for the Bible. I know you're right now in the middle of the 30-day shred.
Yep.
Which is crazy.
About halfway through.
Yeah. So listen to the whole Bible in 30 days. And what's so great about that is when there's a discipline aspect of that shared experience that's occurring regularly, it's amazing the bond of friendship that is built between men.
And the 4th way is challenging each other. Men need to be encouraging each other and asking meaningful questions. You got to be intentional about it.
Yeah.
Without being intentional, it's not going to happen. There really isn't going to be the growth you want to see. And it's important to note that all of this becomes significantly harder once you're married. Can speak from experience here. These are things you want to develop early on. So important to develop early on. I love skiing. I learned how to ski probably high school or earlier. If I tried to learn to ski today, it would be a really bad experience. I wouldn't have the time for it, wouldn't enjoy the process. It would just be difficult, uninteresting, wouldn't have the time for it. It just wouldn't happen. There are some things like this where as a young guy, as a single guy with more time, there's a time and a place to really lean into some of these ideas and really grow something and build something, because later in life, when you're having more responsibility, when you have more on your plate, when there's more that you're juggling, a wife, kids, whatever it is that you have, you're just going to have less margin, less time to really invest in some of these things. So you want that ball rolling, so to speak. And thankfully, I could have done better. Absolutely. I wasted some time early on in my college years. I could have done some of these ideas better. Thankfully, there's some fruit to speak of. And I'm a huge beneficiary of that. But the important thing to know is this isn't something to wait around for or think, okay, when I am married, that'll be something I work on. To the guys that can, work on it now, work on it when you have more time, because it's going to pay huge dividends in the future.
That reminds me of a conversation I was having recently with a parent. They're not part of our church community or our lives really at all. And they were just sharing how hard it is as an adult, as a parent, to make friends. And they mentioned that the friends that they make are their children's friends' parents. And they were saying, those become your friends because your children, become friends, and then you're forced to interact. And so that's kind of like your one opportunity to become friends with another adult. And I thought, wow, that's really sad.
It's limiting.
It is so limiting, but it also makes sense, particularly outside of a local church context. It is really hard to make friends as an adult and as a parent. The other people you're going to meet predominantly are adults you're going to meet through your children's activities. And for men, it's important for them to note that it's not just hanging out with other men doing whatever that is going to build that bond of brotherhood. If men are only hanging out to watch, How I Met Your Mother, you're not going to build the bond of brotherhood that you will when these other 4 categories that we just talked about are in place in your life. And so to caveat what a brotherhood should include, there should be 3 aspects that appear in your brotherhood, regardless of the way it's formed and where it's formed. And these 3 things are loyalty, shared experiences, and accountability. One of the most fundamental aspects of any brotherhood are going to be loyalty between brothers, where it's like we have each other's backs through thick and thin. where we have a shared experience because we've done stuff together, whether it's a one-time experience, we climb Mount Everest together, or we've lived life together, so it's a shared experience. And there's accountability. He can ask me how I'm doing, and I'm going to be honest, and I can ask him how he's doing, and he's going to be honest.
And while today we've focused on the aspects of brotherhood, something important for guys to know is that if you do this well, there are going to be many other areas of your life that are going to benefit. But where it starts are really in some of these core brotherhood relationships. If guys have strong relationships there, you'll see benefits, for example, with your parents, with your siblings, friends outside of that immediate group, significant other, right? If you have a girlfriend or a fiance, or if you're married, those relationships are going to benefit. So it's important to know, do this because it's the right thing to do and it's healthy, but the benefits beyond that are pretty big.
That's an excellent point, because oftentimes men will prioritize the relationship with the significant other or the generic friend group.
Right.
Because that's low-hanging fruit. It's easy. There's not the friction of iron sharpening iron. There's not the being called higher. There's not the accountability. And so men will naturally navigate towards situations that are easy for them.
Yeah, least resistance.
Yes. And one of the things that we are challenging men when it comes to putting together a vision for 2025 is to be intentional about being part of or building a brotherhood where it's not about the convenience. It's not about the ease. It's not about what you can get away with. And it's not a matter of isolating and saying, I don't want you to see a part of my life, but it's literally inviting men into your life intentionally on a regular basis. And you're saying, hey, we're going to walk life together. I'm going to know you. You're going to know me. And that is uncomfortable. It is not easy, but that's where growth happens.
Yeah. I mean, to use your example earlier, you don't climb Mount Everest because it's easy, right? Quite the opposite. And I think men, if they have that mindset here, I'm not doing this because it's easy.
Yeah.
I'm doing this because it's needed and it's healthy and there's a lot of good fruit.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great place for us to conclude. So there are 3 things we want you to do this week. Number 1, take stock of your life. Do you have a brotherhood? Men in your life that you can rely on, men in your life that you're accountable to, men in your life who know you. If the answer is no, then number 2, you need to be intentional here in 2025 about building a brotherhood. This is not something that you're just going to fall into or naturally discover. It's going to take work. And it's important to note that this actually takes time. Do it now so that by the end of 2025 or into 2026, you have the beginnings of that brotherhood. And I'll tell you right now that the benefits of having a brotherhood will pay huge dividends down the road when it comes to pursuing a romantic relationship or marriage. And finally, number 3, if you have a brotherhood, be intentional about spending time together with them. Be intentional about being vulnerable and open and about shouldering one another's burdens with love. As always, we love having you here on the Art of Pursuit podcast.